Hello, hello. Welcome to Reclaim the Podcast. I am your host, Thaís Sky, and on this episode, we're going to talk all about safety and safe spaces and safety in relationships, with the fundamental question being, why is it that I feel unsafe in safe relationships? All right. Hello, hello. Okay. Welcome to season 5 of Reclaim. I'm trying something new here, doing video and audio. The video you can watch on YouTube, and the audio, of course, you can catch wherever you get your podcasts. We're at season 5 of the podcast. That is incredible to me. Season 5, my goodness, that means that we have had over 100 episodes at this point with incredible guests, wonderful guests, as well as so many episodes where I riff on all things healing, things like worthiness, right? Things like relating with our parents, things like navigating the difficulties of our world. This podcast is really a place where I disseminate my thoughts, as someone who has been on her own healing journey for since I was 18, so a little bit of time, as well as a licensed psychotherapist in the state of California, as well as a coach for women healing their worthiness wound. I've created this concept of the worthiness wound out of my own experience, as well as my clinical experience and practice of working with women all over the world in trying to understand why is it that we feel this chronic sense of inadequacy, as well as this chronic sense of feeling too much. Now, my kind of journey really started in high school with an eating disorder, and then in college it just got worse, and I started working with somebody to help me understand what was going on internally, because I had a sense then, I was so young and so smart, that maybe the eating disorder was a symptom of something else. There was a real struggle happening within me, and I wanted to understand that struggle so that I could feel more confident, feel more competent, feel more capable, feel like I am deserving of taking up space in the world. And luckily, through the years, I have not only recovered from my eating disorder, but also have really started to understand myself, anxiety, depression, all these types of symptoms in a different light. And that is what I bring and now get to share with all of you. You know, for me, the journey started with spiritual traditions like Hinduism, Buddhism, uh, Christianity. I'm very grateful for these lineages for guiding me into myself. And what I have come to understand, and kind of one of the main principles of everything that I do in all of my programs and offerings, as well as this podcast, is this really uh, foundational understanding that everything that we want, whether it's career success, whether it's financial success, whether it's kind of just to feel more better within ourselves, whether it's to feel good in our bodies, to have a different relationship with our bodies, whether it's um, to feel more comfortable putting ourselves out in the world, if you're an entrepreneur or a leader, right? All of these things that we may want out of our lives, really at the core of it comes down to relationships. I mean, at the end of the day, we're really here to grapple with what it means to love and be loved. What does it mean to belong? What does it mean to feel like we are a part of something? And what does it mean to actually feel that and not just experience that? And so for me, in this foundational knowledge, I've come to understand that the self is really born out of an other, right? There's this beautiful quote by Winnicott that the baby's first mirror is the mother. So think about that, right? The baby's first mirror, the baby's first understanding of self is how the mother sees the baby. How much we understand of ourselves is really born out of how other people saw and understood and related to us. And so the core of the healing work then is that if our sense of self comes out of relationship, that means that what's broken in relationship can really only be healed in relationships. And that's why I call my work relational healing. I think about it more in terms of relational skills rather than self-development skills. And that's what I pour into all of my kind of work and everything that you see me do, which includes my signature group program, Worthy Women Rise. It's a year-long experience of cultivating worth. Doors will be opening soon. You can go to Worthy Women Rise to learn more, as well as my one-on-one work, both with patients here in Los Angeles, as well as virtually with anyone in the state of California, but also I do coaching for women outside of the state. And that work is really grounded in, how can we use our relationship to deepen your understanding of yourself, to heal the ways in which we feel terrorized in many ways by relationships. And again, how that looks can obviously be very different for each of us. But at the core, there's a desire to belong. There's a desire to feel worthy. There's a desire to feel loved. And that is so much of the work that I get to do. I am also more recently am creating an in-person process group for people in West Los Angeles to come together, women to come together to do the process work of learning about ourselves through group. It's a really, really potent transformational container where we get to really learn how we relate to each other in a very in vivo type way. And then, of course, I also do mentorship for depth coaches who want more skills and tools and competence for how to work with people's emotional internal landscape beyond just cognitive or behavioral, like mindset changes, like how to actually do deeper healing work and create sustainable, ethical businesses doing so. Okay, so I think that outlines like all of the different aspects of my work. You can, of course, learn more by going to thaissky.com. I wanted to give an overview for those of you who are new to the podcast. And if you're tuning in from previous seasons, I'm so glad that you're here. I know that there's so much competition for your attention out in the world, and it just is such an honor and privilege that you are here with me, here listening to Reclaim. If this podcast has meant anything to you, something I do ask of you is to please, please, please leave a review on iTunes. It really does help the algorithms bump my podcast up so that more people can see the podcast. So if the podcast has touched you in some way, please consider leaving a review. I really appreciate it. I read them all. I'm touched by it all. As you can see, if you're watching this via video, this is me. This is me in my office. I'm a real person out into the world, out in the world, and I share a lot of my world and my thoughts on Instagram. So you can catch me there at I am Thaís Sky. I'll also link all of this for you in the show notes. Okay. I want to talk about safety in relationships. This is my 5th time now trying to record this topic. It's a difficult topic for me to kind of wrap my mind around how the best way to disseminate and talk about this information, because it's a very sensitive topic. I think this is, I have a lot of care for this topic. I want to make sure I'm doing it well. I want to make sure that I'm adding the nuance I think is really important to make sure this topic lands. I certainly don't want to be insensitive to the ways in which safety feels very unique to each of our nervous system and to each of our unconscious landscape. Safety has a lot of difficult meanings for people. And so how do I take all of that and put it into a podcast? It's hard. I'm struggling with it, but I'm going to try, because this is an important topic. The word safe has been very prolific lately. At least certainly I'm seeing it being used a lot. One of the big ways that I've been seeing it used is the idea of a safe space. And then out of that grew this idea of brave space. So I want to explore my own perspective on safety in spaces and in relationship that I think is a little unique, that I just haven't heard as much conversation around. And so hopefully it will help you have a little bit more of an understanding of maybe what's required for there to be a safety. So of course, I want to start by naming that this episode is specifically about why don't I feel safe in safe spaces and relationships? That's the question. That means that inherently in that question, we are assuming that the space is safe, which means that there is very little chance of abuse going on, right? So I'm talking about relationships where there hasn't been grounds for any type of verbal or physical abuse taking place, that emotional abuse, psychological abuse is not taking place. The premise of this episode is not about abuse, and it may not be applicable to those of you who may find yourself in abusive settings. I'm not talking about those settings. I'm talking about the settings where you know on one level, consciously you are aware of that this relationship is safe. And yet we don't feel like we can take that in. And yet we're finding ourselves acting as if it's not safe. That's what this episode is about. Okay. So let's put that as a discernment right now, so you can decide how much of this episode you want to take in. Okay. So of course, then we have to wonder, well, is the word safety, is it even helpful? And this is where I also get stuck on recording this episode because sometimes I don't find it helpful. Sometimes this idea of safety just kind of exacerbates this continued conversation I see online about how any type of conflict is abuse, any type of disagreement is harm. That can get very complicated because there's a difference, right? There's a difference between we're disagreeing on something and now this idea that we're disagreeing on is actually harmful. So many ideas not acted out is not harmful. And so we want to be delicate with that. We want to be delicate in the fact that, well, for many of us, we have been kind of taught or learned to navigate conflict with sameness. So what I mean by that is many of us are taught that conflict is bad, conflict is wrong, conflict is a sign of harm, conflict is a sign that you're not safe, conflict is a sign that the other person's mind is of danger to you. And we've been taught that through a variety of different ways. And so, well, it can be difficult then to discern, is this a disagreement or is this harm? Is this conflict or is this abuse? And those kind of parameters, it can be difficult to discern if we don't have a relationship with that person. And so another kind of foundational kind of exploration that we have to add to this conversation is that what I'm talking about here are spaces and people where we're engaging in a relationship with. So the people of the internet don't owe you safety, right? The internet doesn't owe you a safe space. That doesn't make sense, right? You're not in relationship with people in comments on Reddit. You're not in relationship, so they don't owe you anything, truly. I mean, I prefer to imagine my online persona as a reflection of my in-person persona. I would like there to be a congruency. You're not going to find me saying things online that I'm not willing to say in person, but I know that can be different for different people. All right, let's not get sidetracked. Let's get back into um let's get in. How about we start here? How about we start by thinking about how this idea of safe space. Okay. Now, if I Google how the definition of what safe space looks like, it's a place or an environment in which a person or a category of people can feel confident that they will not be exposed to discrimination, criticism, harassment, or any other emotional or physical harm. Obviously, being able to go into a space knowing that you're not going to be discriminated or harmed against is really important to our mental health, right? Having spaces, relationships where we feel comfortable in, we feel safe in, we feel like the other person understands us, where we feel like we can be ourselves. This is really important to our well-being. That's a given. I think that that's quite obvious. And so it's important for us to find places where we can be ourselves. That's also a given. But then the question goes, well, Thais, I'm in safe relationships where I know that there will not be any emotional or physical harm that comes to me, and yet I don't feel safe in them. And the ways in which I notice that I'm not feeling safe in a safe relationship is I'm having an internal kind of physiological experience. My heart is racing. My palms are sweaty. I'm starting to feel very activated. I'm imagining that this person is attacking me. This often happens in conflict, right? When our nervous system is engaged, we're in fight, flight, freeze, that may be an indication that you're feeling unsafe. And that can feel really unsettling when the actual circumstance doesn't really call for this reaction. So what we tend to do is we tend to make the circumstance fit our reaction by perceiving the environment as unsafe. And this can be very difficult to tackle. It requires somebody kind of reminding us, like, I'm not attacking you. Um, Again, that can be really hard when we're imagining that they are. And so that comment may come to us as gaslighting. Okay, so what I want to envision, here's my proposal. Maybe if I get to the proposal, the rest of the words will come easier for me. What I want us to imagine when we're thinking about safe space, safe relationships, relationships where we can trust the other person, is that safety is co-created. Co-created. It's not a passive experience that just happens. It's a relational dynamic that exists between two people. This is how uh, this idea of this person has never said anything mean to me, and then a year into our relationship, they're saying mean things to me. One way that we can, there's many ways we can understand this, but one way that we can think about this is something about the way the relationship has been co-created by both individuals, elicited something now in the dynamic where meanness is part of the culture. If we think about safe space as co-created, if we think about safe relationships as co-created, then we can think about unsafety as also co-created, that there's some permission that's happening within the two people that allows for that behavior to be taking place. When I think about safety being co-created, I feel much more empowered in a couple of things. One, I don't assume that somebody is safe. I don't assume a space is safe. This assumption is important for me because if I assume a space is safe without really knowing anything about the space, let's say I go to a conference and the values of this conference is in alignment with my values. So I'm just now going to assume that the space is safe. I'm going to go into this space and I am going to, assume that everyone shares the same values. What I'm doing there is essentially projecting a sameness. I am projecting, it's a defense. Projection is a defense. I am defending against the ways in which people's minds may be different. And I am essentially putting that projection onto everybody at this conference, that just because everybody is there, everybody is going to be similar to me, everyone's going to hold the same values as me. What can be, slightly dangerous about that is it's a little bit naive. Just because people have similar values doesn't mean they have the same mind. Can I trust that other people's mind can be different than mine and that I am inherently safe, right? That someone's difference doesn't necessarily mean that it's an attack. That somebody's difference doesn't necessarily mean that there's something wrong. This can be really hard to change deep down within us when differences in our family system has meant ostracization or has meant rejection in some way. A lot of family systems operate this way. If you propose something different, if you have a different emotional experience than your caregivers, if you're having a different attitude, then you're essentially told that you're a problem, that that you need to change. This happens a lot. It's one of the main mechanisms of family systems is an assumption of similarity. And that may mean then that we feel that conflict is abuse, or that conflict is a sign that there's something wrong happening. Because inherent in conflict is an understanding that people are different and that there's a certain amount of difference that must be tolerated within relationships in order for intimacy to take place. Because intimacy requires two different individuals, two unique people coming together. If those two people are pretending to be the same, then actually intimacy can't take place. So when we're again thinking about Thaís going to this conference, if I just go in assuming that it's safe, I am now going to be a victim to the difference, right? So I'm going to be going into the space, assuming that everyone's like me. once someone shows that they're not like me, that's going to feel really confronting to me. Now my projection of the safety is shattered. And now I'm going to have to come to terms with the fact that I feel deeply unsafe. This assumption is not a co-created safe space. This assumption is an assumption of sameness, and it is inherently not safe. So when I start Worthy Women Rise, and somebody shares, so beautifully with me that they feel really safe in the space, and it's like session 2, session 3, I question that. Why do you feel safe here? We barely know each other. Should you feel safe here? Like, yes, on one level, you can feel safe in my professionalism. I've run this program many, many times. I have skills in facilitation. I get a lot of supervision and support and training around my facilitation skills. I take this work very seriously. So on the one hand, like, you coming into this program, you're coming into Worthy Women Rise because you trust me. You've listened to my podcast, you trust what you hear. And so then you're going into the space with a certain level of safety. That's totally fair. But if that safety is completely unchecked, if you're immediately getting very vulnerable, then I'm wondering why it's important that you assume that everyone is the same. Because safety is co-created, and it takes time to co-create a safe space between two people, between a group, between an environment, etc. It takes a relationship in order for safety to be cultivated. It is not just inherent within a person to a certain, like I said, to a certain extent. So, what are safe relationships? Of course, safe relationships means that both parties exemplify certain traits. Respect may be one of those traits. Curiosity for each other may be one of those traits. Communication may be one of those traits, right? These are traits that both people exemplify, and they come together and they create a safe relationship. Now, let's say that the relationship has all these safe traits, and yet you're still finding it unsafe. Well, that probably speaks to a relational template that you're bringing into this relationship, where you are perceiving this other person in ways that they are not being. You're maybe perceiving them as an unsafe person from your past rather than the safe person that they are. And if you're continually finding yourself there, then you're going to respond and react to that person in ways that you imagine them to be and not who they actually are, which may then create a relationship that is inherently unsafe. Again, I'm not talking about abuse. I'm talking about just feelings like not belonging or misunderstood, right? Or feeling like you're being rejected in some way. And that's where relational healing really plays an important role, to kind of shift this relational template so you can start to open and see the ways in which the relationship, the other person, is actually showing you signs of safety. And then together, you're building a relationship of safety. Yes? Because really, when we're creating safety for others, we're letting them be more of themselves. This is what we want. We want more safety. So, part of thinking about safety and safe spaces, something to think about as well, another aspect of this conversation, is this idea of safety versus control. And there's this question, it's not my question, it's probably comes from some psychoanalyst, but I don't remember who, and maybe it's Donald Winnicott. But the question is, can you trust the person you cannot control? I'll repeat that. Can you trust the person you cannot control? Wow. Which means that the opposite is also an important question. Or can you only trust people you can control? How are the subtle ways in which we try to control the other person's reaction and in order to feel safe in the relationship? That's an assumption of sameness. It's an assumption that if you have some type of omnipotent control over the other person's mind, and if you can get the other person's mind to be similar to yours, then you can feel safe. But that safety is actually built on a very shaky foundation, because safety is co-created by individuals coming together and there being space for differences. Yes? Okay. So when we're thinking about, let's say, let's give an example. And let's kind of maybe break down the example. Let's say that you found yourself in a partnership where you come from an environment where people leave. Okay. You and your partner get into a conflict, they get into a fight. Your partner says to you, I need to take a moment. I'm completely dysregulated. I'm not processing what's happening here. I need a moment. I'm going to go. I'm going to leave. And your partner gets the keys and goes for a drive. Now, your partner has full intentions of coming back in 30 minutes to resume the conversation. At least that's what's happening in their mind. And this is the first conflict that the two of you have, right? So you don't know your partner's conflict style that well yet, and they don't know yours well yet. But in their mind, they're like, I need a moment. I'm going to go. I'm going to come back, and we're going to resume talking about this. But you don't know that because they don't share your mind. They didn't share your mind with you. So all you see is that they're saying that they're dysregulated. They take the keys and they leave. Now you come from a relational background of people leaving, disappearing, ghosting. And so, of course, you're now going to probably imagine that your partner is never coming back. They grabbed the keys, they left, they're never coming back. You suddenly feel completely overwhelmed. You shut down. You feel so unsafe. You feel completely abandoned. You feel like this is the worst thing that ever happened. And it reminds you of a similar abandonment by, a caregiver when you were a child. Suddenly you feel very unsafe. Now, this is again the setup for the question of why do we feel unsafe in safe relationships? Because so far your partner hasn't given you an indication that there's something really unsafe happening here. But for you, you're interpreting it as unsafe. Now, what can we do in these moments? This is where it's important for us to soothe ourselves, for us to, take care of ourselves, for us to do what needs to be done, and, essentially kind of give ourselves compassion for feeling really dysregulated. Let's say in half an hour, your partner comes back. Now it's an opportunity for the two of you to explore what happened in that distance, in that separation, that for you, that behavior felt tremendously unsafe. You're not accusing your partner of harm, but you're saying that that behavior, while the partner had the intentions of coming back, you didn't know that. And so this is the meaning that you made of the person's absence. The person then can kind of communicate and share with you their experience of their leaving. And maybe the conclusion after this conversation is that next time that there's a conflict and the partner needs some space, then maybe they don't leave the house, they go to a separate room. Or maybe that there's a time limit. You set a timer for 30 minutes, right? There's an expectation to come back and the timer is being set to honor your experience and also honor their experience. In that process of the rupture, but also the repair, talking about what your experience and what their experience was and navigating what to do next time, this repair process is what builds a safe relationship. So that next time you enter a conflict, ideally the two of you can keep in mind, you can keep in mind that your partner comes back. You can keep in mind that people come back. Your partner has come back before, your partner is going to come back again. And now you set a timer. So you have now a physical object to remind you that the person's coming back. And that person gets to have their moment to recuperate, and they get to come back. Maybe it doesn't happen the second time, or maybe not even the third time. But ideally, eventually, as we do relational healing, it will get to a point where there will be this safety established, where you know that the person comes back. So now, during the 30 minutes, it doesn't feel quite as disorienting. There's a safety that's built together. Safe space is co-created. Now, there is this idea, that safe space means that you're coddled. Safe space means that you don't ever experience discomfort. Safe space means that it's an illusion. There's no such thing as safe spaces. And I don't necessarily agree with that either. I don't think that safety and coddling are the same thing. I think safety, again, if it's co-created and it's really meant to meet the individuals where they're at. For something like a conference, co-creation may look a little differently, of course. A safe space and environment requires a little bit of different collaboration. We may, as individuals, have to hold more of our own safety and our own ability to leave and regulate as we need. But I don't think that safety and coddling are the same thing. I don't think that at all, because coddling is that nothing can ever happen to disorient you, dysregulate you. And that's not what I'm talking about with the safe space. You notice that in my example, he's still the partner, still gets to go, and you still have to tolerate some of that absence. In a safe space that is coddling, we may put the argument that the person should never leave, right? That's not what we're talking about. But of course, if we do see safe space as coddling, then it makes sense that we're going to see that the actual opportunity for growth is through brave spaces where we're inviting people to be brave. I think that that's a dynamic that actually can exist within the paradigm of safety. A safe relationship is a co-created relationship where there's space for both attunement to each other's needs, but also ability to be different, to have there be differences between two people, and therefore have some discomfort and some bravery required from both individuals. That to me is a safe relationship. And so what can happen is that people tend to go to therapy or coaching with me for a worthiness wound, where the core of it is, well, we're now going to have an opportunity to talk about and experience these relational skills and develop it together so that you can eventually go into your relationship with your partner and not feel so tremendously abandoned when they need a little bit of time to recuperate. Okay, so let me think if there's anything else I want to say. Of course, in order for safe space to be co-created between two individuals, there also has to be an internal safety that has to be built, right? The more we feel safe inside, the less things need to feel safe on the outside, right? The more we can be with ourselves, the less we self-abandon, the less we need other people to be the way we need them and want them to be. There's more space for the other person to be how they are, right? If we demand that everybody be the way we want them to be, then that's not really a safety. So, but that does require us to be able to create an internal safety. I remember when I was in my 20s dating somebody who had a very different taste in music than me. And I remember at the time thinking, like, can I even be in a relationship with someone who has such a different taste in music than me? Because, oh my gosh, that must mean then that they're so different than me. That's an example of ways in which we believe that the only way we can be in relationship is with sameness. But that sameness is usually short term, short lasting. Even if they have the same music as me, doesn't mean that they have the same values as me. It's something that's much more important to share. Okay, so, how do we start to feel safe in relationships that are safe? Well, we create internal safety within a trusting relationship. We do relational healing, or we do this, regulation work, nervous system work, where we learn how to feel safe with our internal world. We do psychoanalytic work where, we're creating space for us to name and make sense of our internal landscape in the presence of another person. As we do that, we start to create a sense of safety within ourselves, and we don't demand it as much from other people. And one of the best things that we can do in co-creating a safe space in relationships is to ask questions. If you're not feeling safe, if there's a question of what did you mean by that, it can be a really powerful question, right? And then, of course, create boundaries if the behavior is unsafe. So in that example where the partner leaves, in the repair, the conversation is in some ways about boundaries. Like, I can't, leaving is too much for me. It's too disorienting for me. I can't be in a relationship with someone who leaves. So how can we find ways that you can still leave? You can still get your space while I'm also attended to. Those are in some ways, boundary conversations, right? So if you're feeling like there may be some harm happening or feelings of unsafe happening, asking questions is a really powerful way to get clarification. Yes. Now, I will also say that in order for us to be in the relationship where we can ask questions, we kind of have to know that there's not going to be retaliation, right? And that's really important. Okay. But that goes back into like what is an unsafe relationship, and that's not what this episode is about. So Partly what we're doing when we're talking about creating safe relationships is really letting go of the need for control and letting go of the need for the other person to be a certain way in order for us to feel safe within them, right? That's a really important part of this conversation. Um, and I think those are all the topics that I want to explore. As I'm here, I'm like, the episode is still not the best that I feel like I could have made it, but I'm gonna release it anyway because it needs to be released. I can't do another version of this. So hopefully in all of that, it made sense in some ways or gave you some things to think about. I imagine there's a lot that I missed here. But I think the core of this, truly, the biggest takeaway is that don't assume that things are safe. Create an internal safety so you don't need things to be safe outside of you unless we're talking about relationships. And then we get to co create safety in a way that works for both people. That requires continual dialogue. We can't assume. We have to be willing to get uncomfortable and talk about these things so that we can create the type of relationships that feel really nourishing and sustainable for us. And I think that this is possible for every single one of us. Okay, so I'm going to end it here. Thanks for being here with me. Welcome to season 5. I'm really looking forward to all of the wonderful things I have in store for all of you, and I will talk to you soon.